So my number three is a little movie called Jurassic Park from 1993,
Very little. Yeah.
directed and very little, directed by one and only Steven Spielberg, starring Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, Richard Attenborough. Quick log line, if anybody doesn't know what this movie is about, which I can't imagine. But a pragmatic paleontologist touring an almost complete theme park on an island in Central America is asked with protecting a couple of kids after a power failure causes the park's clone dinosaurs to run loose. What a weird description, but sure, yeah. So I think, like a lot of people, especially kids of our age, in the early 90s, like this movie was a phenomenon no
Hmm.
matter where you were. I mean, I still have like vague memories of just sitting in the theater and being totally wowed and just in awe of what this movie was. So I think to me, this, like I was saying as a kid, like captures that emotion of excitement and thrill of just like entering Jurassic Park in the
Hmm.
movie, and also in my mind entering a world which just felt so far from me, like lush green forests and outdoors, the marvel of looking at these ginormous creatures, which, again, when you grew up in India, there's a lot of flora and fauna around you.
Right,
So,
right.
so you don't, maybe I took a lot of that for granted. I know so many people would visit and they wanted to go and look at the elephants or what have you. And
Yeah.
it's not like the elephants were in my backyard, but they were, I mean, this stuff was accessible, it wasn't
Mm.
so far away. But I think seeing dinosaurs who are larger than life in this movie, like that feeling of awe was irreplaceable. So I think that's what this movie represents to me. And then, of course, as I've grown older and watched it again, it sort of brought up more, complicated, interesting themes with our
Hmm.
relationship as humans with the outdoors and nature, which, I mean, I'll get into that. But yeah, curious, what's your memory of this movie, watching it the first time?
Yeah, this I was 11 when this came out,
Yeah,
and when I was that young, there are few movies I remember seeing for the first time, and this I have very vivid memories of going with
same.
one of my friends and then his sister to this specific theater. I remember everything about it, and leaving, and we were just like, "Oh my gosh, what did we just see?" And like you said, this movie is a cultural phenomenon even today and stands the test of time. I mean, if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it. And there definitely are a lot of themes here about the outdoors and sort of what I was touching on and how I view it as a place that humans are a guest and they should they,
Mm-hmm.
they shouldn't be. This is sort of the extreme of that because they're creating a world that doesn't exist anymore with flora and fauna that are extinct, bringing back animals that are extinct, and thinking we're that they're the guests in our world when
Mm-hmm.
actually it's kind of the reverse. Like nature does win in the end. Like the humans have to leave Jurassic Park. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't work. And that's interesting that you bring up, having elephants being, it sounds like sort of normal for you in a way. Like they weren't exotic because you would see
They
them
weren't
quite often.
exotic. That's the
Whereas like
word.
for me, like I barely saw elephants in a zoo. So I get you need to go to a extinct animal to be awed by it because you're used to the things that would awe me as a kid who grew up in Boston. Monkeys probably walking around too all the time. Like that would
Yeah.
be very like that's exotic to me. And I get why this movie then captures like something that this the feeling that me feeling seeing an elephant would be like you seeing a velociraptor or something probably.
Yeah, exactly. I will say though, like watching this movie again in preparation for this after a
Uh-huh.
long time, it had been, I don't know, 10 plus years, I think, since I'd seen
Oh,
it.
okay.
Uh, it felt a lot slower to me. And I don't know, it's still very enjoyable, but it felt a lot more like a kids movie at this point. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is also partly because the cultural sort of footprint of this movie is kind of larger than life.
Right.
So it's so memeified and it's so in the zeitgeist, always has been. So maybe that's sort of part of it. But yeah, just like the reaction shots and whatever Laura Dern is doing in the movie, all of that, and also Jeff Goldblum, like all his lines about what are you doing, and
Right.
creating this thing, like they're very on the nose from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very much, it sort of felt very on the
Oh
nose
yeah. Yeah.
and kind of slow too in some ways. And so I don't know, it was an interesting rewatch,
Huh.
not what I had in my mind watching this, 10 years ago and obviously as a child. Like, I guess its memory sort of precedes what I feel about it now.
Interesting. Yeah. So I watch this movie quite often, so
Yeah.
I didn't have that. Like I think I saw it even last year before seeing it
Huh.
again for this podcast. Like I see this movie quite often, but yeah, it
Mm.
does have and I think one of the geniuses of the film is there is a slow build towards the big reveal of like the T-Rex is sort of what everyone's waiting for, right? It's on the
Yeah.
poster, and you know, even when they first get to the encampment, it's not there. And they're like,
Yeah.
okay, are we actually going to see it? And then stuff starts going wrong. And then all of a sudden the T-Rex comes in and it's like a big moment. But I think it's like 50
Mm-hmm.
minutes into the movie is
Mm-hmm.
when you really start, like the dinosaurs are sort of everywhere. And I like that he makes you wait with anticipation as an
Mm-hmm.
audience member, he being Spielberg, makes you wait as an audience member because then it builds up the, oh my gosh, what is this going to be? What is this going to be? And something else too that is maybe hard for younger listeners to kind of understand is the impact of these special effects.
Oh
So
gosh, yeah.
nowadays you watch this and it's like, okay, yeah, they're actually the dinosaurs, you know, kind of hit or miss, but it's fine. Like we've
Yeah.
seen this a billion times and we're used to seeing incredible CGI creating things that don't exist. But back in 93, this was new. It really was.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, how did they even do this? Like I didn't
I
understand that
know.
as a kid. And I think the effects actually still hold up really well. But
Pretty
that
good.
sense of wonder and awe is tough, I think, for people who didn't grow up with this movie to understand like what
Yeah.
that did. I mean, similar to what we were talking about in a couple episodes ago with Terminator 2, where
Mm-hmm.
those effects too were just like, what are we seeing? You know?
What are we
And
seeing?
Jurassic
Yeah.
Park is very similar to that. When Dr. Grant first sees the dinosaurs, and this is incredible, like, you know, Steven Spielberg does a great job of like showing people in awe, like the reactions of his,
Mm-hmm.
you know, his characters. And you see the awe on Dr. Grant's face, and then Laura Dern looks over and it's like, oh my God. And then finally you see the dinosaurs. And the audience feels that too, because you're like, how did
Yeah.
they do this? You know, they're asking, how do they actually recreate the dinosaurs? We're like, how did the filmmakers
How do the
create this? And
filmmakers do
I
it?
think that is such a brilliant move in this film, which again might be lost on modern audiences because they've seen even better special effects, and
Yeah.
everything under the sun now has been recreated in CGI for better or for worse. But
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I sort of remember as a kid watching this movie and feeling that maybe, like a part of my brain sort of feeling that maybe the dinosaurs are real because it was so real.
oh yeah,
It was
yeah.
so larger than life that, like practically you knew this is not real, but you
Mm-hmm.
sort of, at least I sort of felt that maybe they do exist somewhere,
Yeah.
that's how groundbreaking this was. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then this whole thing of like, humans taking advantage and like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying, like flipping, like that's obviously omnipresent in the movie. But I noticed that this time, and maybe this was always the case, that yes, there's that at play, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but then you Spielberg does a great job that you're also kind of along the ride to kind of understand how this was created. Like, how did Richard Attenborough create this? And that's pretty amazing too, that you do get caught up in the wonder of kind of the human creative spirit as well,
Mm-hmm.
and because if I feel like if that was not set well in the beginning, I don't think the stakes would land on you the way they do, like how bad this is and how exploitative this is and how wrong this is. It
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't land on you in a big way if it wasn't set up that you almost kind of cheer and root for the fact that, oh my gosh, you've done this.
Right.
Just the way Dr. Grant and Laura Dern are also doing. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
in awe of how have you done this? Like the whole explanation of how the amber and this and that, like all of that. I mean, they're sort of grossed out by it a little bit, but they're also kind of digging it a little bit. And I think you want your audience to be doing the same.
Right.
And that's pretty
Right.
amazing.
No, and I think too what this movie does so brilliantly is exposition, which is something in a
Yeah.
movie. Usually it's like there's a scene where some character kind of explains everything, and you're like, okay, I know you have to do this for the purpose of the plot. But here they put you in, it's because it's a theme park. You go through
Right.
that Mr. DNA thing. So the
Right.
cast is learning how they did this, but as an audience member, you're learning and it doesn't feel like
Yeah.
exposition. And the scene when they're going through all the different dinosaur encampments and they say, okay, this is the Velociraptor. They do the Velociraptor does this. Because back then I'd never heard of Velociraptor before. Everyone knows like the
Same.
Brontosaurus and that this movie kind of put Velociraptors on the map, and they explain why they're so dangerous before you even see them. But because it's done in this
Mm-hmm.
way that's so organic, when the stakes, when all of a sudden the dinosaurs are out, and you sort of you're like, oh no, the velociraptors, they hunt in packs, and they're going to probably do this, because you know everything already. It makes it a lot more scary. And I think the exposition in this movie is just top notch, and how they weave it in and make it organic. It's just incredible. Yeah. One other thing too, that for me at least is a reading of this film too, is not only is it like, science gone wrong, which is sort of definitely a theme of this. Like, just because we can doesn't mean we should. I think that's the famous line by Jeff Goldblum's character.
Mm-hmm.
But I also had read this as a meta commentary on CGI as well. In the sense of, as an audience, you're like, wow, how did they do this with the dinosaurs? Oh, this is a great filmic technique, and this will help movies. But actually, like, we've seen sort of where that's taken us as in film. Like, I think there's an over reliance on it, a loss of the practical element. There's some magic is taken away, and they blended it so well, but it eventually gets out of control. And I think there's a way you could read this whole movie as us being excited and in awe of CGI, and then sort of it eventually eats us and takes over the whole industry and turns into this thing where it's like not special or interesting anymore, which is just a reading I've always had on this film since about college. When I was rewatching it once, I was like, oh, this is actually, you could apply this to filmmakers being in awe of something and then not understanding what they just unleashed. And now it's sort of you can't put that genie back in the bottle, unfortunately.
That's interesting. I never thought of that. That's so true. That is so true. But I think that's what I'm saying, right? That's you can apply this to pretty much any industry and any sort of technological advancement, is that should we actually be there?
Right.
And at some point you do admire and appreciate the human creative spirit, because that's sort of what keeps us going, and our curiosity and such. But then there are always consequences, you know, on a varying degree, some very bad to some benign. And we are once again at the precipice of that with all this AI stuff. Like,
100%.
There we are again.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, on that note, when I watched it for this podcast, I noticed something I never noticed before, which is in the computer lab, when they have the hacker or not the hacker, but the guy who like is running all the computer systems, and then he eventually like shuts everything off to escape with the samples. On his computer monitor, there's a picture of Oppenheimer. And I'm like, oh, they're trying to say that, like, Oppenheimer was, a famous scientist. I mean, I'm sure people know this now because of the new movie that came out this summer, but he was a scientist that's credited with inventing the atomic bomb, which, again, some guy who's driven to do something that humans had never done, but then look what it caused. It, it killed hundreds of thousands of people. And now we live in this world that's under threat from nuclear weapons forever now. And I was like, oh, they're trying to say, like, this is sort of, again, an example of a scientist that went too far. And Jurassic Park's about science that's gone too far. Just something I've seen this movie like dozens of times. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a little Oppenheimer like photo right there on his monitor. Like they're trying to, the production designer, I think, made a little laugh when he or she put that there. I'm like, I know what I'm doing here. I thought that was a cool little Easter egg.
Little Oppie everywhere.
That's right. You can't escape him this summer, at least. Yeah. Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.